The moment you need her, you've already lost her. Let that sink in. Maybe no one told you this before, but needing a woman, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, isn't romantic. It's ruinous. It's the fastest way to kill attraction, to lose your edge, and to watch your sense of self dissolve into hers. And yet, everything you've been taught says the opposite. You were raised to be the nice guy, the good listener, the emotional sponge. Be sensitive, they said. Be available. Be soft. And somewhere along the way you learned that love meant losing yourself. But here's the truth no one dares to say out loud. She doesn't want a man who needs her. She wants a man who leads himself. This video is not for the man still clinging to comfort, hoping someone else will complete him. This is for the man who's tired of overgiving, tired of feeling unseen, tired of being emotionally twisted by someone he gave everything to. This is your wake-up call. We're diving into a different kind of masculinity, the kind rooted in Stoic strength. Not stone-cold detachment, but conscious detachment. Not ignoring emotion but mastering it. Not chasing approval but embodying purpose. Because power, real power, doesn't come from controlling her. It comes from commanding yourself. You'll discover why emotional neediness is the new form of self-sabotage, why stillness attracts more than noise, and how to become the kind of man who's so rooted in who he is, she either aligns or drifts away without shaking him. This isn't about becoming heartless. It's about becoming unshakable. So let me ask you something. When was the last time you sat alone in silence and didn't feel empty? When was the last time you said no? Not to her, but to the part of yourself that craved her validation? Because this journey isn't just about women. It's about reclaiming your center, and that begins right now. Let's begin. I used to be that guy, the one who thought love meant showing up every second, replying to every text within seconds, giving more than was ever asked. I thought that if I just loved harder, stayed longer, and proved how much she meant to me, she'd never leave. But she did. And when she left, she didn't walk away from me. She walked away from the man I had become, the version of me that revolved around her. That's when I learned the first hard truth. The moment you need her more than she respects you, it's already over. Needing someone is different from choosing them. When you need, you cling. You sacrifice your identity for the illusion of closeness. You trade your boundaries for breadcrumbs. And slowly, she stops looking at you the way she used to. Because you're no longer rooted in who you are. You're orbiting her and she feels it. See, women are emotional radars. They can feel when you're centered and when you're off balance. They know when you're giving out of strength and when you're giving out of desperation. And nothing kills attraction faster than desperation. It's subtle, but deadly. You text first every time. You drop plans the moment she calls. You say yes when your gut screams no just to avoid tension. You become what you think she wants, instead of standing as who you are. And worst of all, you keep asking without using words, am I enough now? But here's the truth most men are afraid to face. The more you seek her validation, the less valuable you become in her eyes, because a man who constantly asks to be chosen is not the man she chooses. Now let me be clear. This isn't about playing games. It's about playing by principle. And the first principle is this: you must lead yourself before you try to lead anyone else. Real strength isn't found in chasing her attention. It's found in not needing it. I remember the shift. After that breakup, I stopped asking why she left and started asking why I abandoned myself to keep her. I went silent. I stopped trying to fix things. I picked up books, weights, and silence. I studied Stoicism, and in it, I found a code. Be still. Be disciplined. Be sovereign. That was the beginning of something new. Not a better version of me, a truer version. I stopped living for reactions and started living for results. I stopped seeking love from someone else and started respecting the man in the mirror. And as strange as it sounds, that's when things changed. The more I centered myself, the more people respected my space. The more I stopped chasing, the more I attracted women who saw value in stillness, not noise. Because when a man lives with purpose, with direction, with emotional independence, he becomes magnetic. Not because he's trying, but because he no longer needs anything from anyone to be whole. And that's what she truly wants, even if she can't explain it. She wants to feel your gravity, not the pull of your insecurity, but the presence of your purpose. So ask yourself, what kind of man are you becoming? One who begs to be seen, or one who is impossible to ignore? Because you can't fake solidity. You can't perform peace. You either have it, or you don't. And if you don't, it's time to build it. One boundary, one purpose, one choice at a time. The first time I sat alone in silence, really alone, it terrified me. No phone, no TV, no conversation. Just me, four walls, and the echo of all the things I hadn't been willing to face. I realized something in that stillness. I had been using her, and women in general, as distractions from myself. From the emptiness I never addressed, from the purpose I never defined, from the discipline I kept postponing. Stoicism taught me that we must live according to nature, but not the nature of impulsive desire. It's the nature of reason, of principle, of sovereignty over self. So I began to rebuild, not by becoming harder, but by becoming deeper. I started each morning with silence, 10 minutes, then 20. Not to be spiritual, but to listen to my own mind. To feel what I had buried beneath noise and validation seeking. Some mornings it was anger, some regret, but every morning it was honest. And that honesty was the first step to rebuilding trust, not with anyone else, but with myself. From there, I embraced discipline, not as punishment, but as a path back to integrity. Cold showers, daily training, focused reading, small wins that built internal weight. There was no applause, no approval, just progress. And the irony? The more I detached from needing validation, the more people started noticing the shift, not because I told them, but because stillness carries power you don't have to announce. I also learned the value of solitude, not as loneliness, but as alignment. In solitude, I stopped measuring myself by what I was receiving, and started measuring myself by what I was becoming. You begin to see that most desire isn't real. It's just a mask for uncertainty. You want her, Not because you know your path, but because you're hoping she'll give your life meaning. But when you live from certainty, when you are rooted in your identity and vision, desire transforms. It stops being hunger and becomes invitation. It's no longer, I need her to feel whole. It becomes, I'd love to share my wholeness with someone who aligns. And trust me, women can feel the difference. When you lead with desperation, everything smells like need. Your compliments feel like pressure. Your presence feels like a transaction. Your touch feels like a silent contract. But when you lead with certainty, your desire doesn't ask anything. It offers everything, without needing anything in return. That's when she leans in. Not because you're trying harder, but because you've stopped trying to get something from her. You're simply being someone she can't shake. Now let me be honest. This path is not glamorous. It's not loud. It doesn't give you instant results, but it gives you something better. Peace. Peace that doesn't come from control. Peace that doesn't require her to behave a certain way. Peace that lives in your chest even when she pulls away. That's what Stoicism gave me. Not a wall, but a foundation. Not coldness, but clarity. Not silence as punishment, but silence as power. And that's when everything shifted. Because when you're no longer chasing love to avoid yourself, you become someone worth loving. There was a time when one text from her could ruin my entire day. If she took too long to reply, I'd start spiraling. Maybe she's losing interest. Maybe I said the wrong thing. Maybe she found someone better. I'd check my phone 5, 10, 20 times an hour, like her attention was the oxygen I needed to stay alive. That's not love. That's emotional slavery, and I didn't realize it then. But every time I reacted to her silence, her tone, her mood swings, I was giving away my power. Not just to her, but to everything outside of me. Stoicism taught me a hard truth. Power doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from mastering yourself. Most men think dominance means being louder, tougher, more assertive. But the real flex is being unfazed. When she's distant, you remain steady. When she tests your boundaries, you calmly reinforce them. When she lashes out, you don't flinch, you don't chase, you don't crumble. Because you know who you are, and in that knowing, you stop being reactive. You become immovable. Let me paint a picture. She pulls back. You feel the fear. The anxiety creeps in. The old you wants to send a long paragraph, beg for clarity, ask what's wrong. But the man who's mastered his emotions, he pauses. He breathes. He chooses silence over sabotage. That silence isn't indifference. It's discipline, because you've trained yourself not to act from impulse, but from principle. And women feel that. See, what most men don't realize is that women test, not to manipulate, but to assess. They test to see if your calm is real or performative, if your confidence is surface level or unshakable. They don't want a robot. They want a man who can feel, but not fold, who can care without collapsing, who can love without losing himself. So when she gets cold, throws emotional bait, questions your worth, don't take it personally. Take it as an opportunity to prove, not to her but to yourself, that your peace doesn't depend on her predictability, This is inner mastery. It's knowing that every time you don't react, you're rewiring yourself. You're breaking the addiction to chaos. You're building a mind that stays still in storms, and over time, that stillness becomes magnetic. Because she's seen the men who crumble, the ones who blow up when challenged, who beg, who over-explain, who try to prove they're not like the others. But you say nothing. Not because you don't care, but because you don't need to convince anyone of anything. That's the kind of presence women respect, even if they don't admit it out loud. I remember the moment it finally clicked for me. She was angry, accusing me of not caring, testing my reaction, waiting for the emotional outburst that used to be automatic. But instead of defending myself, I paused. I looked at her with calm, and I said one thing. You're allowed to feel what you feel, and I'm allowed to stay centered. She didn't know how to respond, because I didn't give her the chaos she expected. I gave her truth and stability. From that day on, something shifted, not just in how she saw me, but in how I saw myself. I realized that emotional control isn't about repression. It's about elevation. It's not about being numb. It's about being anchored. And that's what Stoic men understand. Your power isn't measured by how many women you can attract. It's measured by how little they can shake you. There's a false idea that strength is loud, that it walks with a heavy step, talks over others, and dominates every space it enters. But I've come to realize something different. True strength is invisible at first, quiet, relentless, unshakable. And it's built, not in a single moment of glory, but in hundreds of private moments when no one is watching. I didn't become stronger when I finally told her off. I became stronger the morning I wanted to call her, and didn't. When I sat in the ache and did nothing. When I showed up for myself instead of hoping she would. That's the thing about mastery. You don't win by reacting. You win by returning to yourself. Every time you resist the urge to chase, to argue, to prove your worth, you become more powerful. Not to impress anyone, but because you know you're finally leading yourself. And leading yourself starts with what you do every day. Waking up with intention. Training your body, not for aesthetics, but for discipline. Feeding your mind with philosophy, not noise. Protecting your peace like it's sacred, because it is. Not letting someone's mood hijack your entire identity. When she pulls away, you don't panic, you breathe. When she tests you, you don't defend, you observe. When you're unsure, you don't grasp, you ground, because you've trained for this. This is what Stoicism is at its core. Not just ideas on a page, but muscles of the mind, forged through practice, through challenge, through repetition. And every time you stay still when your emotions scream otherwise, you earn another layer of armor, not to protect you from love, but to protect you from losing yourself in it. I remember one moment vividly. She accused me of being distant, said I wasn't as present as I used to be. The old me would have scrambled, over-explained, promised to do better, but that day I stayed calm, not because I didn't care, but because I knew who I was. I looked at her and said, I'm here, I'm steady. If that's not enough, I respect your choice. She didn't expect that, because most men fold in that moment, apologize for their peace. But I didn't, and she didn't leave. She leaned in closer. Why? Because women, whether consciously or not, are drawn to men who lead themselves, who don't collapse under pressure, who don't outsource their worth. They test not to destroy you, but to see if what you claim is real. And when you pass that test, not by performing but by being, something shifts. Respect deepens, attraction transforms, connection becomes rooted, not reactive. But even if she walks away, you don't lose, because you didn't lose you. That's the real test and the real triumph, to remain unmoved by the emotional tides of another, because you've become the ocean itself, still, vast, powerful. So, here's the truth, raw and simple. If you can't lead yourself, you have no business trying to lead a relationship. Because love without self-leadership is chaos. It's attachment without direction. And that kind of love will drain you until there's nothing left but resentment. But when you lead from stillness, everything changes. You no longer chase energy. You choose alignment. You no longer need her to stay. You invite her to witness who you've become. And that kind of man, he's not chasing power. He is power. There was a time when I didn't know what my frame was, because I didn't even know who I was. I shaped myself to fit whoever I was dating. If she liked quiet guys, I toned myself down. If she wanted a man with ambition, I played the part. I was malleable, fluid, like water poured into her container. And just like water, I had no shape of my own. That's what happens when you live outside of your frame. You orbit hers. Her emotions set your tone. Her needs become your compass. Her approval becomes your oxygen. But here's the truth. You can't lead if you don't have a world of your own. She's not looking to be the sun in your sky. She's looking to see if you already shine. That's what frame is. It's not ego. It's not control. It's your internal structure, your values, your standards, your direction. Frame is knowing what you stand for, even when she pushes against it. Frame is choosing your path, even if she threatens to walk away. Frame is leading, not by dominance, but by stability. And a man without a frame, he becomes reactive, unsure, inconsistent. He punishes her for changing, when, in truth, it's him who never stood still. Women don't want to be led by a man who can be moved by every mood. They want to feel safe in the presence of a man who leads himself first. I remember a moment that tested mine. She got emotional over something I said, not because I was cruel, but because it challenged her belief. She wanted me to backpedal, soften my stance, make her feel better. The old me would have folded, apologized for my truth just to keep the peace. But this time I didn't. I stayed calm. I looked her in the eyes and said, "I hear you. I respect how you feel, but I'm not going to apologize for something that's aligned with my values." She paused, surprised, maybe even uncomfortable. But in that moment, she also saw something she hadn't before. A man who doesn't negotiate with his own integrity. That's frame, not needing to win the argument, not trying to keep her happy at all costs, but standing rooted, with compassion, not control. Too many men think leadership means forcing her into submission. But real leadership? It means being unshakable, not unkind. It means guiding, not dragging. It means holding the frame and letting her choose if she aligns with it. And yes, sometimes she won't. Sometimes she'll test, challenge, even walk away. But if your frame crumbles under that pressure, it wasn't a frame. It was performance. The Stoics said, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. That means not changing your values just to avoid discomfort. Not folding your standards to keep someone who was never meant to stay. You set the tone, you hold the line, and you let your peace do the talking. That doesn't mean you don't listen. It means you don't bend your backbone to avoid tension, because once you give up your frame, you give up your power. And once you give up your power, respect starts to erode, quietly, subtly, but surely. So let me ask you, where in your life are you trading your integrity for attention? Where are you adjusting your truth just to be accepted? Because a man who knows his frame doesn't need to be accepted. He accepts himself fully. And in doing so, he becomes the kind of man others can trust. Not because he's perfect, but because he's consistent. And that, more than charm, more than attraction, more than tactics, is what creates real connection. Lead yourself. Hold your frame, and let the right people find their place within it. Here's something most men don't want to hear. She doesn't lose respect for you because you're wrong. She loses respect when you're unsure, when you betray your own truth to keep her around. She doesn't want perfect, she wants solid. And there's a big difference, because clarity, even if it's uncomfortable, creates safety. But uncertainty, that creates anxiety. When you waffle on your values, when you say one thing but act differently, when you fold at the first sign of resistance, she feels it. And she starts to wonder, if he won't protect his truth, how can he protect me? Women aren't drawn to men who say yes to everything. They're drawn to men who can say no and mean it. Not out of arrogance, but out of alignment. Frame is not about stubbornness. It's about steadiness. It's not about my way or the highway. It's about, this is my lane. You're free to walk beside me if it aligns. And when you hold your lane, when your boundaries aren't a performance but a principle, she feels something deeper than attraction. She feels trust. Trust is the emotional ground she needs to relax into her feminine, to stop testing, to stop controlling, to surrender, not in weakness but in faith, because your frame says, you don't have to lead everything. I've got this, I've got me. That's what she truly wants. Not a man who needs her approval, but a man who already walks in approval with himself. And yes, she will test it. Not because she's toxic, but because she's looking for evidence. Can you hold your truth, even when it costs you comfort? The moment she says, I don't like when you talk that way, will you shift your tone just to please her? When she accuses you of being too cold, will you overcompensate to keep the peace? When she pulls back, will you chase just to restore balance? Or will you breathe, stay centered, and let her feel your grounded presence? I remember a moment when my frame was tested harder than ever. She didn't agree with how I was handling a conflict in my business. Said I was being too direct, too decisive, that I should be softer. And for a split second, the old part of me kicked in, wanting to adjust, to be liked, to smooth everything out. But I caught myself, because the truth was I wasn't acting out of ego. I was acting from alignment. I had weighed the situation, I had chosen based on values. And I wasn't going to betray that just to be perceived as nicer. So I told her calmly, "You're entitled to your view, but I lead in the way that reflects my values. I won't change that to make anyone feel more comfortable, even you." She was silent, not offended, not angry, just surprised. And then she said something I'll never forget. "I may not always agree with you, but I trust you." That's the power of holding your frame, not to win debates, not to get admiration, but to create space for real trust. Trust that goes beyond feelings, beyond comfort. Because in a world that constantly shifts, a man who doesn't becomes rare, and rare is respected. So here's the truth. Every time you hold your truth when it's tested, you rise in masculine power, not because you dominated anyone, but because you refuse to abandon yourself. And when a woman sees that, she relaxes, she softens, she follows. Not because she has to, but because she knows she's safe with a man who follows something deeper than her emotions, his own inner code. There was a time when I thought leadership meant action, that to lead in love, I had to chase, persuade, and pursue. I believed if I didn't constantly initiate, keep her entertained, or prove how invested I was, she'd lose interest. But what I didn't understand back then is this: leadership is not about pursuit. It's about presence. Pursuit often comes from lack, from fear, from the need to constantly do in order to feel enough. Presence, on the other hand, comes from fullness, from alignment with purpose, from standing still and radiating who you are without demanding anyone notice. And women can feel the difference. When you're chasing, every word, every gesture has an undertone of need. When you're leading through presence, everything you do is anchored, grounded, intentional. It took me years to learn this, and I learned it the hard way. There was a woman I was deeply drawn to. She was stunning, magnetic, and unpredictable. And I made it my mission to win her over. Texted first, planned everything, always available. I thought I was being a leader, proactive, decisive, clear. But deep down, I was just trying to be enough. And the more I chased, the more she drifted, until one day she looked me in the eyes and said, "You're doing everything right, but something feels off. It's like you need me too much." That stung, because she was right. I had wrapped my identity around being chosen, and in doing so, I had abandoned the very thing that makes a man attractive: his mission, his growth, his mastery. Real men don't lead with effort, they lead with energy. They don't draw women in by seeking attention. They draw them in by embodying direction. A man on purpose is magnetic. He's building, creating, becoming, not to impress, but because he knows who he's called to be. His time is precious. His energy is focused. And if she wants to be part of that world, she's welcome. But he's not bending that world to chase her. That's what women find irresistible. Not the man who's always available, but the man who's deeply committed to becoming more. Because that man doesn't just promise safety, he is safety. And it's not because he says the right things, it's because he lives the right rhythm, consistent, calm, clear. Detachment isn't distance, it's dignity, It's the ability to want her, enjoy her, value her, and without needing her to complete you. And consistency. That's the heartbeat of real leadership. Not the kind that demands loyalty, but the kind that earns it through stability, through alignment, through truth. So many men try to win her through words, gestures, strategy. But none of that matters if your center is fragile. She'll feel it, she'll test it, and if it breaks, she'll pull away. Not because she's cruel, but because she can't trust it. But when you lead yourself, when your days are built around discipline, your values are non-negotiable, and your joy doesn't hinge on her replies, you stop chasing, you start being. And in that being, you invite her into something more than a relationship. You invite her into leadership because women don't want to carry the frame. They want to be carried within one. And when you hold that frame with calm strength, steady focus, and unwavering self-respect, you'll find that you don't have to chase love. Love walks toward the man who's already walking his path. You become truly powerful the moment you stop asking her to confirm that you are, because the man who needs her validation to feel whole was never whole to begin with. She may adore your charm, admire your ambition, even fall in love with your potential. But if the core of you depends on her reaction, the foundation isn't strength, it's survival. And no woman wants to feel like the center of your self-worth. She wants to meet a man who already knows who he is, a man who can love her without needing her to complete the picture. I remember when I finally understood that. I had spent so long trying to be enough, tailoring my behavior, holding back truths, playing safe, not because I was dishonest, but because deep down I was afraid that if I showed up fully, she might walk away. But one day, I stopped. I stopped curating, stopped filtering, stopped holding my breath, and I started building. Not to get her attention, but to reclaim my own. I got serious about my mornings, woke up early, trained harder, ate cleaner. I created systems around my purpose, started writing again, cut distractions, poured into my friendships, my learning, my craft, and something happened. Without saying a word, without announcing some grand transformation, people started noticing, not because I was louder, but because I was clearer. And her, she started leaning in. Not because I chased, but because I had become someone worth following. That's the paradox. The less you need her to see you, the more clearly she does. Not because you're trying to impress, but because you're living a life that speaks for itself. Too many men talk about their standards, their dreams, their values, but it's all talk, and women can feel the gap between your words and your walk. You don't need to preach that you're focused. Your calendar shows it. You don't need to convince her you're confident. Your stillness shows it. You don't need to promise her you're going places. Your consistency proves it. The man who leads doesn't declare it. He embodies it. And that's what draws her in. Not manipulation, not effort, not performance, but evolution. Because when a man evolves, the energy shifts. He's no longer trying to be chosen. He's already chosen himself, fully, unapologetically. He's not chasing. He's becoming. And she feels it. She senses the depth, the clarity, the weight in your silence, the decisiveness in your presence, the lightness of your non-neediness. And in that space, something magical happens. She no longer has to wonder, is he strong enough to hold me? Because she sees you holding yourself every single day. And whether she chooses to align with that or not becomes secondary. Because you've already won. You've built a life so magnetic, so full, so purpose-driven, that even if she walks, you don't lose your center. You don't chase, you evolve. And if she can't meet you where you're going, you let her go. Not with anger, not with resentment, but with peace. Because your mission didn't start with her, and it doesn't end with her either. That's masculine leadership. That's what makes you rare. That's what makes you remembered, not just by women but by the world. And maybe you're wondering, does this actually play out in real life? Can stoicism and self-leadership really change how a woman sees you? Let me tell you a story, a real one, about a man who used to chase until he didn't. The day Daniel stopped chasing. A few years ago, a friend of mine, let's call him Daniel, went through a breakup that nearly broke him. He was the textbook nice guy, thoughtful, generous, always available. He did everything right, bought flowers, sent good morning texts, made her feel adored every second. But the more he gave, the more distant she became. Eventually, she ended things saying, "You're amazing, but I just don't feel it anymore." Daniel was wrecked. He couldn't understand how being so loving had pushed her away. That's when he started digging into stoicism, into masculine energy, into self-respect. And something shifted. He stopped reaching out, not from bitterness, but from clarity. He started waking up at 5 a.m. to hit the gym, picked up journaling, read Epictetus, started building a side business he'd always talked about. Instead of chasing closure, he chased growth. 6 months later, they ran into each other at a coffee shop. Same woman, but a different man was sitting across from her. He didn't seek validation. He didn't try to win her back. He simply listened, spoke calmly, smiled without expectation. And this time, she leaned in. "You feel so different," she said. "Like grounded." He just nodded, because Daniel had stopped trying to be chosen and started choosing himself. And whether she came back or not didn't matter anymore, because now he led from presence, not pursuit. And that's exactly why she noticed. In the buy. And it's simple, not easy, but simple. You don't win by controlling her. You win by mastering yourself. You don't become unforgettable by clinging tighter. You become unforgettable by becoming someone who doesn't fall apart when she walks away. Because the truth is, you were never meant to orbit her world. You were meant to build your own. With vision, with strength, with purpose. And in that world, love isn't a lifeline. It's a choice. A beautiful addition to a life already full. You lead by standing still when everything tempts you to chase. You lead by being the calm in emotional storms. You lead by holding your truth, even when it costs you comfort. She doesn't want to fix you. She doesn't want to mother you. She wants to feel your strength, not in dominance, not in control, but in your groundedness, your presence, your self-respect. Because when you love yourself more than you crave her validation, you become magnetic. You become rare. You become the kind of man she can't shake, even if she tries. So if she leaves, let her. And keep walking, not with bitterness, but with peace. Because you were never here to beg, to bend, or to be liked. You were here to lead, to embody truth, to move forward, with or without her. You're not here to be liked. You're here to be respected. And that starts with how deeply you respect yourself.